It was 4 in the evening. The sun was playing peekaboo with the clouds behind the scattered hills all around. Everywhere the eye could see, there was nothing but lush greenery. A dense forest surrounded by deep valleys. An isolated ambience and calmness. A small town adjacent to a tribal settlement nestled on the way from Visakhapatnam to Araku Valley. When Rajesh was transferred here, Meera became quite anxious, wondering how she would manage in such a wild place. Rajesh had a government job, a respectable position. Then she thought, it was only for 3 years, and if it became too difficult, they could always find a reason to move to another city. So, reluctantly, she agreed, but once they arrived, the beauty of the surroundings completely captivated her. She would sit on the balcony for hours, enjoying the views. Up until now, she had only experienced the hustle and bustle of city life. This was her first time living in a mountainous area. Rajesh had managed to get government housing, but there was a slight delay in the allocation. That's why they were living in a rented house. It was a one-story place, reminiscent of a cottage. It was luxurious and incredibly beautiful. They were both surprised that the landlord had accepted without any hesitation that they only needed it for a few months. The landlord lived downstairs while they occupied the upper floor. Above it, there was a terrace, with a room at one corner surrounded by many flower pots, bursting with colorful blooms. The landlord had only one condition, to always keep the stairs locked. Rajesh understood this to be a precaution given the wild surroundings. That made sense, too. Without dragging out the conversation, he deemed it appropriate to comply with the order. In the landlord's house, there were only 2 individuals, Mr. Shyam Sundar Vyas and his wife, Sushma Vyas. To his knowledge, no third individual had been seen in the family. However, there were definitely 2 or 3 servants, including the gardener, the cook Lakshmi, and the maid, Pushpa, stood in a big garden filled with lush green grass. In one corner, there was a large neem tree, and in the center of the courtyard bloomed a harshringer. As evening approached, the delicate fragrance filled the entire area, and by morning, the ground was blanketed with its flowers. Suddenly, she remembered that she had hung clothes to dry on the roof earlier in the afternoon. Mana was playing in the adjoining room, just a year old. She wanted to talk to Sushma Ji to inquire about schools for Mana, but for some reason, every time she looked at him, she would quickly turn her face away. A child's smile is enchanting, yet seeing him made her feel uneasy. She had begun to fear them, something about their mental state seemed off. She had mentioned her concerns to Rajesh, but he had scolded her into silence. They needed to find time, and there was no other option. Whenever she asked the maid about them, she received the same response: "Madam is sleeping after taking her medicine." Whatever the illness was, Meera had never pried into it. They had only been there a few days. "Mana, let's go upstairs to get the clothes," she called out. He immediately stopped playing and crawled over to hug his mother. She lifted him into her arms and locked the door. A strange sound was echoing from the lower veranda. Peeking out, she saw Sushma Ji gently swaying on a swing. The swing moved softly, the noise likely coming from her movements. The day was turning to dusk, but sunlight still scattered on the roof. Set in a hilly area, a storm can strike at any moment, and it can start pouring unexpectedly. There's no way to be certain. She hurriedly started to gather her clothes. When she looked ahead, she noticed that one of the windows in the corner room was open. She had been up here every day, yet she had never seen that window open before. It was surprising. She glanced towards the door. There was no lock on it. That meant someone was inside. Her curiosity piqued. Who could it be? She stealthily approached and peered through the window. It seemed as though someone was sitting inside, reading comfortably in a chair, perhaps. The back of the recliner faced her, making the hair of the person sitting look slightly blurred. The room was softly lit with a dim blue light. A table lamp flickered in the corner. Several books were arranged on the shelf. A large bed was covered with a white sheet. There was also a small sofa and a table. The room appeared nicely decorated. "What are you looking at, sister?" Mira jumped at Pushpa's voice and immediately stepped back. "You really startled me, Pushpa." The door was open, so I was just looking. "Who's inside?" Pushpa always kept an extra key to come upstairs, which she used to water the plants every day. The gardener took care of the courtyard's garden. Her curiosity lingered on. She had the impression that someone was inside. "No one, sister. I came because Mom asked me to clean up the room. We need to change the sheets once a month, remember? So, I figured since I'm here, I might as well water the plants while I'm at it." She began to affectionately pet Mana. The moment Mana saw her, he would jump in excitement. He too had grandchildren, which is why he had bonded so well with Mana. Suddenly, someone called out from downstairs. "Pushpa! Oh Pushpa! Where are you? Hurry up!" She tossed the water pipe to the ground and shouted back, "Yes ma'am, I'm coming. I just finished my work, and what sudden trouble has popped up now? These moms too, what should I say now?" Pushpa, grumbling, locked the room and hurried towards the stairs. "Sister, I'm leaving, you should come back soon too. The rain is about to start." Here, the indigenous women affectionately refer to everyone as sister, regardless of age. "Oh, you should have turned off the light inside and closed that window," Mira called out to Pushpa as she was leaving. "No, sister, I'll do it later, it's fine. If I'm late, just consider it trouble," Pushpa said before exiting. The clouds had gathered ominously. She gathered her clothes and was preparing to head back. A strong wind was blowing, and the open window was banging against the grill, making a raucous noise. It felt like it might break. It is glass. Let's just push it closed from the outside, she thought. Carrying Mana in her arms, she approached the window. Just as she was about to reach it, a sudden pressure from inside caused it to slam shut. Her heart raced as if it were a dry leaf trembling in the breeze. Yes, there was wind outside, but the force seemed to originate from within. Confused, she turned to check the door. A lock hung there, indicating that no one was inside. A chill ran down her spine, and her legs began to wobble. With hardly a second thought, she bolted towards the stairs, racing down them in minutes. Breathless, her mind felt disoriented, struggling to grasp what had just happened. What was she afraid of? How could the window close by itself? The evening deepened into night, engulfing her in confusion. In the corner of the porch, there were stairs leading up, but she felt too frightened to even glance that way. The street in front of her felt eerily desolate, with the bungalow at its end. Beyond the road lay a deep valley and a thick forest. There was barely any sound from vehicles, just an unsettling silence. Below, Sham Sundar sat in the porch, and catching sight of him brought a wave of relief. Mana had drifted off to sleep after his milk, and she remained seated, waiting for Rajesh. She considered calling him but knew he would brush it off, attributing blame to her and her TV serial instead. And as she anticipated, that's exactly what happened. After dinner, she nervously recounted the entire incident to Rajesh, who looked stunned. "What on earth happened to you, Mira? You rushed down the stairs with Mana, didn't you? How can you say something so foolish when you're so well educated?" Rajesh was frightened, not by her story but by the potential accident. "Do you realize how much trouble it would have caused if you had slipped, Mira? It's a blessing from God that you both are safe. I'm telling you, starting today, no going upstairs. Everything needs to be dried and dealt with on the back porch. Do you understand?" He issued the command sternly. But Rajesh, there isn't any sunlight there. It's just the shade of the mango tree and Mana's clothes. She couldn't even get the words out that Rajesh had shouted, Mira, please don't bring new troubles for me in this unfamiliar city. Please understand, Mira. What would have happened if you had fallen with Mana today? Look, we will be getting our apartment soon. It's an officer's colony. There's a lot of activity. You will keep yourself busy, and you won't have to deal with such foolish fears. Please be a little patient. Just a little. And yes, your horror story can wait for another time. I'm feeling sleepy tonight and need to wake up early tomorrow. Now, come inside. He pulled her inside. He was confident it would happen like that, and it did. The next few days passed as she tried to cope with her feelings. She was wanting to forget but couldn't. However, she had not stepped onto the terrace again. Not out of respect for Rajesh's orders, but because of unsettled questions. This afternoon, after lunch, she had sprawled on the sofa in the living room. Mana was sitting on the floor playing. The TV was running. Just when she was starting to doze off, Sushma Ji suddenly walked in without knocking and plopped heavily onto the sofa. She was taken aback. The expression on her face seemed odd. No greetings, no pleasantries. She began looking around quietly as if she were seeing the house for the first time. Mira managed a formal greeting and sat up straight. Silence lingered for a moment. Mira was pondering over how to start the conversation. What to say? Your husband mentioned that you used to teach literature? Sushma Ji addressed the awkwardness and initiated the talk. Her eyes searched the room for something. Yes, I taught English literature at college before getting married, but then I lost my job and afterwards Mana. Just as she started to speak, Sushma Ji interrupted. Abhishek also had a strong interest in English literature. Abhishek. Who is Abhishek? She began to attempt to read their eyes, which were searching for something. Jane Austen and Virginia Woolf were her favorites, but they neither answered her question nor looked at her. Mira felt flustered. It seemed unnecessary to have asked. They were lost in their own rhythm of speaking. While talking, they paused and started staring at the wall in front of them. Their gaze became fixed. When Mira turned to look at the wall, she remembered that just yesterday, Rajesh had put up a poster of a cricket player on it. Perhaps they were upset at the thought of the paint chipping off the wall. She got nervous and managed to say, I had objected, but they didn't listen. If that upset you, I can have it taken down. Don't worry, they just... He had read all their books. They didn't pay any attention to her words. He loved literature but was studying engineering. He was in his third year. He would go to the big market in Mumbai to buy books and read all night long. Literature books. Anil had told me. They paused for a moment. Mira's suspicion turned into belief that it wasn't about the wall and the paint after all. They were completely disregarding her. She quickly realized that they were talking to themselves. What followed was their monologue while gazing at the wall. He had told me the whole story of To the Lighthouse. How James's father doesn't let him go to the lighthouse, you know, all that. We also never allowed him to study literature. We forced him to take admission in engineering. What can we do? Everyone in their family is an engineer. Their brothers' sons and the kids of my sisters, including the girls. How could we not encourage our only child to pursue engineering? What would happen to our family's honor? But he couldn't manage to study engineering at all. He kept failing repeatedly. He had a deep love for flowers. In front of his room, that little corner room on the roof was intended solely for him. We had built it just for him. I don't know where he used to get those colorful flower plants and fill the courtyard with them. Once the courtyard was overflowing, he'd bring them and place them in front of the room upstairs. And yes, That night jasmine was his favorite flower. He had brought it from quite a distance. The scent of it was something he cherished deeply. They fell silent for a brief moment. Her heart felt heavy. Her arms and legs were going numb. She had frozen on the sofa. She realized there was no connection in their conversation. It didn't seem to matter to them whether Mira was listening or not. Suddenly, Mana started crying. But she couldn't rise, nor did Mana's crying interrupt their story. She started speaking again. I remember, this year, on May 26th, he came with Anil. Anil, that was his childhood friend. They had studied together since they were young. At the same time, he was studying engineering in Mumbai. They were both roommates. Do you know what happened that day? He went straight to his room without saying a word when he arrived. Anil came over and said, "Auntie, Abhishek is really upset. He left all his papers behind. Please don't say anything to him today. He's very depressed. He didn't even want to come. I had to convince him to join us. Just give him some time." But how long, Anil? How long will this go on? I was firm on this. I was angry that day too. He could tolerate anyone's anger but mine. Even as a child, when Dad scolded him, he'd hide in my lap. He was very sensitive by nature. Very sensitive. No, Auntie, please give him a little time. That day, Anil really tried to explain a lot to us. And how much longer, really? Is 3 years not enough? We're no longer worthy of showing our faces to our relatives. What else could happen? But his dad had blown up in anger. Uncle, engineering isn't his thing. He has no interest or desire for it. He spends all day and night on literature. Just stop it, Anil. What's he going to earn by studying all this? Does everyone get a government job? What do you think? Even the heritage left by our ancestors can slip away if we just sit and do nothing. It doesn't take long. And what about our dignity? What do you think will happen? He enjoyed swinging. But does anyone really swing from a ceiling fan? No, right? He was a very delicate person. He often remarked that Virginia Woolf had also committed suicide by jumping into a river. He was truly a disciple of hers. He always stayed quiet, never sharing his troubles with anyone. Even as a child, while playing, he would come home every day in tears after having been beaten up by someone. Suddenly, they began to laugh, moving like an innocent child swinging. Mira started to feel dizzy. It was as if the walls and ceiling of the room were spinning around, and she might collapse under them. She attempted to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. In the next moment, the laughter turned serious. He didn't even know how to defend himself. His nature was that fragile. But look, is this how people behave? No, right? If you want to swing, you should go to a gym, right? What a madman. They had fallen silent. Their eyes fixated on the wall. Empty, indifferent, almost deranged. Mira was in a daze. She couldn't comprehend what she was hearing. Her mind felt drained of energy. Tears filled her throat but couldn't flow. There was excruciating pain in her throat. Mana was making noise by banging an empty bowl on the floor. He had drenched the entire floor. In fact, because his diaper hadn't been changed for so long, he had turned into a little cotton ball, and the whole floor was soaked. And he sat there happily playing and banging the bowl in the wetness. Mira was already scared, and seeing the state of the floor, her fear escalated, but she couldn't bring herself to get up. A few moments passed like this. Meanwhile, Sushma seemed to regain some composure. She glanced around, and seeing Mira's agitation, she stood up. "Your little one is so adorable, just don't say anything to him." She walked steadily toward the little one, bent down, affectionately ruffled his hair, and said, "Let kids do what they want. It's just the floor, it will be cleaned. Pushpa will handle it." Mira was looking at her in a daze. She wished she could rush over and hide the little one in her arms, but her feet wouldn't move. There was a moment of silence. Suddenly, Sushma's pupils began to settle again. Her face turned cold. Her eyes widened, large, red eyes staring blankly. She began to speak. "Don't say anything to the little one, nothing. If you scold him, he'll get scared. Never impose your thoughts on him, otherwise, they get lost. Children become upset and then they just disappear. No. No. No." Finally, Mira screamed. Suddenly, gathering all her strength, she stood up. She pushed Sushma away from the little one and clasped him tightly to her chest. "Don't make me listen to anything. Don't listen to me. Please just go away. Please leave from here. Oh God, what is happening? Go away. Go away. Stay away from my little one." She was shouting while kissing the little one and crying. Her whole body was trembling. But Sushma seemed completely unfazed. She didn't move an inch, nor did she show any sign of disturbance. She stood there, calm and still, staring into the infinite. When Sham Sundar and Pushpa heard Mira crying out loud, they both panicked. They rushed upstairs, and the moment they entered, they understood the situation. Sushma was standing calmly, while Mira, pressed against the wall, was sobbing uncontrollably with Mana clutched to her chest. Seeing Pushpa, she rushed over and embraced her. Pushpa supported Mira and gestured for her to sit down. Right there, she crumpled to the floor with Mana in her arms. Letting go of her, Pushpa quickly turned to Sushma, grabbed her arm, and began shaking her to wake her up. "Mother, what are you doing here? I've been looking for you everywhere for so long. Come on, didn't you take your medication this afternoon? Didn't you lock the stairs today, sister? It's not allowed for Mother to come upstairs." She glanced at Mira, who was still trembling like a leaf. They became furious. Breaking free from Pushpa, Sushma shouted, "Why can't I come upstairs? Why can't I see my son? Am I sick? I don't take the pills. Just leave me be. You're all terrible. You won't let me see Abhishek. Every day, you give me pills to make me sleep, and then Abhishek comes and goes. Look at how long I talked to him today. Go away, I won't take it. Who knows when he'll come again?" Her voice became harsh, her eyes dulling again. Her gaze was fixed. "Mother, let's go downstairs. That's enough now. Come on." Pushpa was pushing her towards the door as she staggered weakly, half-conscious, but those same words still lingered on her lips. Children can be ungrateful. They disappear. The two of them left. Mira felt a bit calmer. She gently separated Mana and looked up. There stood Sham Sundar Ji with his hands clasped together. His lips trembled. He wanted to say something, but no sound came out. Tears were falling from his eyes, drop, drop. They stood in silence for a few moments, quiet, then slowly closed the door and stepped out of the room. A storm had rolled in and now it had quieted. There was peace. Silence. A profound silence. The only sound was the dry neem leaves rustling outside. "Sir. Sir," accompanied by Myra's soft sobs. The room was filled with the fragrance of parijat flowers. She was still hiding her face in her knees, sobbing. Suddenly, she heard a noise, splash. With a bit of trepidation, she looked. Mana was splashing his tiny palm in the flowing wetness on the floor. His palm had gotten wet and he stared at it in wonder. Once again, he slapped his palm down. Splash. Drops flew up and landed on Myra's face. This salty splash mixed with the salty tears became one. He giggled at his naive, wet palm. Joyfully pleased with himself, he splashed again, splash.